Why can't these young gay men just use condoms like we did? Aren't they fucking on the graves of the people that died?
Welcome to the final episode of Series 1 of HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV, and frankly, I'm tired of it. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that, not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best, interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today, I'm speaking with Marc Thompson, the lead commissioner of the London HIV Prevention Programme and one of the UK's most influential HIV activists. Diagnosed at just 17 in 1986, during the epidemic's most terrifying early days, Marc has spent over 3 decades transforming his experience of profound isolation as a young black gay man into groundbreaking activism that has reshaped HIV prevention. He's challenged systematic inequalities and created the very communities and representation he once desperately needed. Marc's journey from a frightened teenager facing an uncertain future to a visionary leader architecting change is both deeply personal and profoundly political. Marc Thompson, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Hello, Dan. It's great to be here with you, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a very, very hot evening for both of us, I think.
It's sticky in Brixton.
Especially as we're speaking about a half a mile from each other, which is kind of like COVID days.
Yeah.
So can you take us back then to 1986? What was your life like?
Oh, so way back in the dark days of 1986, I was 17 in July of that year. I'd come out to my family a year before. My parents had got divorced and my mum had moved to Brixton from our family home in Peckham. So it was an immense year of change. I'd left school. I'd started to do my what were then my O levels at college, and so I had a really kind of bright future. And I was out and about and discovering myself, the world that I occupied, the gay scene at the time, making friends, and just being a kind of out there, curious, fun, engaged teenager.
What's a 1986 Friday, Saturday night like for you?
It could range. Most Friday nights, I would go to the Prince of Wales pub in Brixton, which is now the KFC, drink myself stupid, like most teenagers did. And then Saturday I would get up and I would go and do my Saturday job in British Home Stores to earn a little bit of money. And then Saturday night I would probably find myself at a black gay party somewhere in the council estate in Brixton, in Peckham, or some other haunt in South London.
So this idea that London's queer scene centered exclusively around Soho and Earl's Court in the 80s simply isn't true.
Not at all. No, not at all. Far from it. I mean, I think what we've got to remember is that in the early 80s, yes, the gay scene was based predominantly in central London, mainly in West London, as you said, in Earl's Court, and partly in Soho then. But for many black queer people and queer people of colour, those places were not particularly welcoming to us as black queer people, either because of racist door policies. You know, you had to kind of prove that you were gay, and that put lots of people off, or you'd get into the spaces and you had to deal with racist punters. You know, let's not live in this world where there was this gay utopia. So for many of us, going into those spaces were not comfortable and they weren't safe. So many people in my community would create their own spaces, would throw house parties, would throw parties in their flats in disused places. But pubs like the Prince of Wales were really, really welcoming and had an incredibly diverse audience and a group of punters there.
I find that such an alarming thing to hear, that there's so much ignorance in the white queer scene.
We all come from society. We all come from communities which are, predominantly white, or they're predominantly black, or they're predominantly South Asian. And we can't help but be shaped by the environments that we grow up in, by the media that we're exposed to, by the TV. And we have to remember that in this time, in the late 70s, the early 80s, this country, the UK, was deeply racist. The National Front was still marching on the streets when I grew up. Margaret Thatcher made a infamous speech about this country being swamped by immigrants in 1978, 1979. And as a result of that, she became Tory leader. So we can't think just because people were gay and they were oppressed that suddenly they're going to lose those notions of white supremacy or white superiority or denigrating people of colour.
So it's 1986, and when you're not nursing a hangover, are you hearing anything about something going awry in America?
Kind of, sort of. I mean, I'd heard about this thing in the States because, I realized I was gay from about 13, 14. So, one becomes alert to the stuff that's just going on around you. You hear gay, your ears prick up. But when I came out on the scene, and I was in this very, very small black gay community in South London, it wasn't a conversation that was being had. If I looked at any news coverage, and there was news coverage, it was white gay men. They were older than me. They were in the United States. And lots of gay men reflect now and talk about one of the rules that we had was not to sleep with Americans. Well, one of the rules we had in my community was, well, this is a white man's thing. And number one, I hadn't been to the States. All of my partners were black. I wasn't promiscuous. And I also didn't know anything about protection either. So all of these things came together for me to be completely unaware that this was something that would go on to impact my life.
You say that you didn't know anything about protection. Why didn't you?
It wasn't a conversation that was being talked about. I mean, I don't think the first safer sex information for gay men in the UK came out until probably just after I was diagnosed. And what I think is really important to remember is how people were able to access this information. Many black gay men and myself, and I'll talk about me in this, didn't venture into those central London spaces, didn't go to the really popular gay pubs like, the Black Cap or the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, where if this information was going to be disseminated, it would have been disseminated there. So there was no route for that information to get directly to a young man like me.
So what was the moment when you thought, I've got to take an HTLV3 test?
It's a really good way to frame the question, because there was never one moment when I thought, oh, I should take this test. It's really important. It was more that my mates were doing it. My older, let's call them my older brothers in the gay community were getting tested. And I was dating a guy at the time who was a good few years older than me. And he said to me, just get it, just get it done. Right. You haven't got anything to worry about. And that's when I did.
And what happened?
So in mid-November 1986, I took myself off to what was then Westminster Hospital, which is on Millbank. It's now luxury flats, I think. I'd gone along, just got the test, and you had to wait 2 weeks to get the results. I had a little bit of a chat with a nurse beforehand, and then went along my business and kind of forgot about it until I had to get my results. And then I pop back 2 weeks later to get my results, and I'm told that they have come back positive. And the world stopped.
It's hard, I think, for people to understand what it is like to process so much information. You know, when your brain started to kick back in, what was it thinking?
You know, it kicked back in pretty quickly. I remember leaving the hospital, being in tears, being just completely shocked, and I've often described it as just walking through a tunnel with no sound, just that echoey sound that you have in a tunnel, completely alone in this world. And as I walked to meet a friend for lunch, the only two things that kept reverberating through my mind was, how am I going to tell my grandfather, who I was incredibly close to and was, you know, a Windrush generation Jamaican man, and my idol, and I would never have children. And those are the only two things that bothered me, because I desperately, even at 17, I'd always wanted to be a father. And then once that dust had settled, I went through, you know, the various stages of grief and loss. I did a lot of crying. I was very, very angry for a long time. And I just descended into a really deep depression.
And you said, and I quote here, "I didn't know anyone who had HIV who looked like me." Why did that matter?
When I started to access services, I would go and I would be the only black gay man there. I'd be the only person who was young. I would be the only person who, frequently the only person in those spaces who hadn't had any form of illness. But then even when I wasn't in those spaces and I looked around my friendship group, nobody I knew was positive. Everybody, or they certainly didn't know or tell me. So that felt like a huge weight and a huge burden, because there was nobody I could look at and just say, okay, you're going to be okay. Or are you as scared as I am? And how do your family feel about it? And how are you going to tell your boyfriends in the future? And I knew that all of this intersected with my blackness and my queerness, and they were not inseparable. So if I'd looked out on the world and saw only white gay men like getting this thing, was I going to be the only black man that had it?
So you were an intersection within an intersection within an intersection.
Absolutely. Yep.
That must be a very small place to be.
I mean, it really, really is. But you know what, Dan? What I was able to do was take what I needed from different spaces, right? And to exist in different ways in different spaces. The biggest thing that I had, though, which I know a lot of people didn't have and don't have, was an incredible support system at home. I was able to tell my mum not long after I was diagnosed. She didn't freak out. She didn't throw me out of the house. I know that she had her own kind of way of dealing with it and her own hurt and worry. She never showed that to me.
That must be a very difficult thing for a mum to hear, because she herself would have seen news and she'll be possibly thinking, I'm going to bury my son.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, that was her reality. I mean, that was her reality, that I don't know when, and this is going to be the way that I'm going to have to deal with it. And I think what we've got to recognize was, for my mum, and I suppose for many other mothers and parents, it wasn't just, oh my God, I'm going to lose my son. I'm going to have to deal with all the shame and stigma that is put upon me because of this disease. And my mum felt incredibly isolated, because she's a Jamaican woman who exists in a Jamaican Caribbean world. And so she felt even more isolated. Like, who could she talk to? Who could she tell?
We're a couple of years into your diagnosis and you're living in Brixton. You talk about coming out about your diagnosis to people. Why is that a big deal?
You know, I mean, it was an interesting one, because I told friends of mine when I first got diagnosed, because I told them I was going for the test. And I was like, oh, did you get your results? Yes, they were positive. And I thought, you know, I'd get a lot of support, which I did from friends, but they also used it as gossip. So that made me really hold back on telling people beyond that. And part of me telling people back in the 80s and 90s, particularly lovers, and I didn't kind of just tell random strangers, was because one felt they had a moral duty to do so. And it was a huge burden put on people who live with HIV to disclose their status. So you could give your partners, and I'm doing air quotes here, a choice. And that's why one had to tell people, or you felt you had to tell people, and it filled you with dread. I mean, because you had to balance, especially if it's going to be a lover, and it wasn't a one night stand. Do you tell this person the first time you've met them because you don't really know them, you can't really trust them? Do you start dating them and run the risk of telling them later where they're going to say to you, why didn't you tell me earlier? So I went through all those emotions. But the worst thing is when I would buck up the courage to tell somebody and they'd say to me, yeah, I already know because somebody so told me. And then that would send me off into a really angry tailspin because people had my story in their mouth. And I became known in the small black gay community as Mark with the virus.
It's not a very catchy name.
It's not, is it? Do you know what I mean? Particularly when you're young and you're hot and you're out there having fun and you think you're just living your best life.
When did you first start to think, fuck this isn't good enough? And if something's not going to be done about it, I'm going to do something.
It was more that, first of all, I was a service user at the Landmark Day Centre, and I was invited to speak to some volunteers as a service user about what it meant to live with HIV. And the volunteer coordinator, another black gay man called Colin Grant, invited me to do so because I think what Colin wanted to show the volunteers was that there's a diversity of people who live with HIV. And what better way to represent that than a young black gay man who's out there living his life?
And the Landmark was in a neighbouring area of Tulse Hill, isn't it?
It was in Tulse Hill. It was a service centre, and you could go and get therapies, talking therapies and physical therapies. There was a amazing restaurant.
It's now a nursery, I believe.
It's now a very, very expensive nursery, yeah. But it really served its purpose when it was open. So I did this talk there, and I was like, oh wow, these people really like my story and they're impacted by it, and you can make a difference. And I kind of parked that. And then Colin and somebody else started to ask me if I would just run safer sex workshops. And I would literally create a safer sex workshop, which would be telling gay men, about different levels of risk. So we'd have games, placing oral sex and anal sex on this continuum of risk, teach people how to put condoms on bananas. And my motivation was, if I can teach these men that they can protect themselves against HIV, maybe they'll be less fearful. And there was something deep inside of them which was like, maybe they won't be so shit to people like me, and other people might have a chance.
Now, we're now entering a period between your diagnosis in 86 and 2001. And you've been doing work at the London Landmark. And almost every single guest I've had on this series speaks about, in the months or years following diagnosis, serious illness that drives them into very challenging spaces of life, basically. Somehow, this wasn't your story, was it?
Not at all. I was very, very fortunate. I mean, yeah, I had mouth ulcers, I had thrush, I had night sweats continuously. There were days, not frequently, where I had fatigue, but I was never hospitalized. I never had to do anything. I smoked, I drank, I partied a lot. I did all the things that, a boy in his early to mid 20s should do, and I never got unwell.
But that said, I've just realized what a dumb question that is for me, because of course it's easy for you to look with hindsight and go, no, nothing happened. But actually, when you're living in it, you don't know that nothing's going to happen.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, it's funny, just the other day I was doing something with my mum and somebody asked her, what was it like, blah, 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 dealing with this. And she was like, every cold, every sniffle, every flu. I was like, she was like, this is it. This is the one. So she carried that and I was the same. So every night sweat, every mouth ulcer, every bit of thrushing on my feet. I was like, okay, this is going to be the one. Get a spot on your body. This is going to be KS. I'd get flu every winter, which wasn't unusual. Most people do, but I'd get it for like 3 weeks and I'd be wiped out. I'd be okay, this is going to be PCP. This is going to be pneumonia, and I'd recover. I would always bounce back. It was only, I mean, I might be jumping ahead, but it was only when I started HIV treatment that I got sick and I was hospitalized.
Tell us about that.
In late 2000, early 2001, my CD4 count I'd always maintained a really good, well, relatively good CD4 count of around 400, 350. Today, I'd be immediately put on treatment. But then they didn't do anything about that. But my CD4 count went down to around 120. And I was feeling fine, but my doctor recommended that I go on to a prophylaxis to prevent PCP. And I had the worst reaction ever to the drugs. My body flared up. It literally felt like my skin was on fire. And that went on for like 3 or 4 days. And I had to be rushed to Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and kept in. You can imagine, right, that you've gone through all of these years and you're fine. Then they put you on the drug to prevent you getting sick, and then you get sick. You're like, Jesus, what the fuck?
Did you find in this period an awareness of a growing HIV community, and was it providing support to you?
I mean, I'd become aware of I was part of the HIV community before that, just by going to places like the Landmark, and also because by this time I'd set up the first black gay men's group for positive black gay men at the Lighthouse. And I remember there were only 4 of us that turned up on the Sunday afternoon, but it was probably one of the most important days of my life. So I started to slowly become more aware of the community. I wasn't necessarily political small p at the time, but my black gay community was expanding. There were more and more men who were stepping up to the bat.
Why was that afternoon with 4 of you in the room so important?
Being in community with those guys who came from a similar background for me, either from the Caribbean or from the African continent. We had similar family experiences. We were all worried about our HIV in a very unique way, and that's not to say it was lesser or more than anybody else's experience, but it was ours because it was rooted in our Black British experience of feeling isolated for all these years, and then suddenly going, oh my God, I'm not alone.
So you became the single point of reference in your community.
I wouldn't say I was a single point. There were other men as well. I mean, I'm not going to take that credit. There were other men as well. But I was one of that group of men that other people in my black gay community would look at, and for good and for ill. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh my God, look at these heroes. Sometimes it was like, I wish these girls would shut up about the AIDS. We just want to party. But there was a group of us who were known for trying to make this change. And also, I think it's important to remember that we weren't just making change around HIV. We were making change about building community. We knew that we had to build community to survive.
So we're moving forward a bit now into 2015. Can you tell me about Prepster?
So Prepster, our baby, which turns 10 this year. Prepster was a movement started by myself, Will Nutland, Richard Kawaji, and Charlie Witzel. And it all kicked off around the conversation started around 2014. But prior to that, Will and I had worked together at Terence Higgins Trust for a number of years in health promotion. And around 2012, Will started to reach out to a number of queer gay male activists and going, what is going on with gay men's health promotion? Nothing. And then we started to hear about, PrEP in the US, the whole Truvada whore narrative. And Will called me up one day, and Charlie and Richard, and were like, look, we're getting questions from clinicians and we're getting questions from community about this drug called PrEP. The clinicians, because PrEP hadn't been approved on the NHS or wasn't available here, clinicians who cared about gay men's health, particularly, and I want to shout out, people like Dr. Mags Portman, who's sadly no longer with us, reached out to Will and was like, can you guys create some information? And so we set up Prepster as a website, which was meant to last 6 months to a year, with the sole intention of providing education to our communities. So gay men, Black African women, trans people, non-binary folk, and providing them also with the tools, because we're activists, to agitate for PrEP access. So providing individuals with the tools to contact their MPs, their local authorities, their health service, to fight for PrEP access for our community.
But what was the landscape for HIV prevention like before you did this? Because my memory was that it was not really any different than it had been in 1994 when people were trying to tell me that getting fucked with a condom was fun.
Safe sex is hot sex. Yeah, I mean, it had really, really dipped, and I was very fortunate to be involved in what myself and my peers describe as the golden age of HIV prevention, which was probably from about the early mid-90s to around 2009-10. And what you saw then was the emergence of organizations like Gay Men Fighting AIDS, big up these two in London in particular, who wanted to reclaim HIV and AIDS as an illness and an infection that disproportionately affected gay men. What we'd seen happening around much of the health promotion, it was this one size fits all. Much of the campaigning was led by the Health Education Authority, which meant it was government led, which meant it was incredibly vanilla. When GMFA comes bursting on the scene and big up, we did culturally appropriate, culturally specific information and messaging, and used imagery that spoke directly to gay men. And I remember when I worked at THT and I was head of programs there from 2004 to 2009, we were able to be really creative. And what was really good was that we weren't just plucking these ideas out of thin air. We were responding to what was then the Gay Men Sex Survey that had been done by Sigma Research. Massive survey. I think it spoke to like 20,000 gay men every year on absolutely every subject related to their health, well-being, their sexual health, their aspirations. And we would take all of that, put it alongside what we then had a national strategy for gay men's health. We had a framework for how that work could be delivered. And we had about 13 organizations across the country, all unified, all working, so we could take risk, and we had a really strong gay press as well. So we had all these different avenues where we could put out campaigns and messaging that went beyond safer sex is hot sex, use a condom every time. We also want to tell men about risk, about zero discordant relationships, around zero sorting. We wanted to understand and talk to men where they were and respond to the reality of their lives.
Which was a discourse complexity that was not being had, was it? It was basically use condoms or stay at home and watch Miss Marple. And that was about as nuanced as any conversation got. There was no conversations about being in partnership if one of you is positive and one's negative. There was no discourse of thruples. There wasn't even a discourse of fucking.
No.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah, none of that. And I think what happens around 2010, 2011 with the Health and Social Care Act, with the Conservative government coming in with austerity, the national program changes, and that becomes something which is, it has to be a one size fits all. And we throw nearly all of our eggs in the basket of testing. That is the way we're going to get ourselves out of this. So the nuances, the practicalities, the sexiness, the fucking of gay men's lives goes out the window. It's just like, get tested, you're a good gay, that's it.
And of course, you're a good gay if you behave like a straight person.
I mean, we get gay marriage around the same time, right? So you tell me if there's a coincidence here.
So amazingly, your work and that of the other people that you were working with and that of the fantastic clinics that promoted what you were doing gets PrEP on the NHS.
It does.
And how did it feel when PrEP became available on the NHS?
I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing time that we'd won a battle that we didn't think that we could win. We would win, but we knew we were on the right side of history. So there was that, and that was really, really important because it took us a long time and a lot of headache for ourselves, for Terence Higgins Trust and National AIDS Trust to get to. But we also know, Will and I, a PrEPster, we knew that was just the beginning of the fight. We knew then that although it was available on the NHS, the next big task was making sure that there was equal access to anybody who is at risk or at heightened risk of HIV. We knew from the trials that had been done before, the PROUD study, for example, had overwhelmingly the spaces had overwhelmingly been taken up by white gay men in London, usually of a particular age as well. So we knew that there were going to be access issues. There would be inequity through the program. We haven't even spoken about Black women, who are the second largest group impacted by HIV in this country. They were completely left out of the conversation with HIV PrEP activists, I hasten to add. I remember sitting in meetings and people talking about, what are we going to do about this for the gay men? How are we going to do this? And I would sit and I go, not one of you have said anything about Black African communities, not once. This is going to bite you on the arse. And here we are, 10 years later. Black African communities have the lowest awareness and the lowest uptake of PrEP in this country.
Did you have any difficult conversations where people were sort of saying, well, why should we give gay men PrEP? They should just use condoms.
Absolutely. There were some really shit Daily Mail headlines. But what surprised me the most and probably pissed me off the most was the challenge that we would get from other gay men, particularly gay men who had lived through the epidemic, people who had lost friends and lost lovers, and they didn't understand the importance of this, how this would free us up, how this would liberate us. And I remember doing talks. Will and I did a bit of a road show, and I remember, it would always be some guy in his 30s or probably late 30s, early 40s at the time, early 50s. Why can't these young gay men just use condoms like we did? Aren't they fucking on the graves of the people that died? And my response would always be, if this drug was available when you were 22, would you not have fought for all of those friends that you lost to have it? And that would stop people in their tracks.
So, Mark, you tested positive in 1986, and 29 years later, amazingly, you set up PrEPster. That involved ultimately you and a series of other fantastic activists getting PrEP on the NHS. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you, a few months later, set up Blackout UK. Tell us about that.
So Blackout UK came from initially from an idea from Rob Barkley, who had been involved in the Running Me Trust for a number of years, and then went on to chair, I'm pretty much sure, the Black Gay Men's Advisory Group, which was a group of black gay men that had come together to look at policy, to look at community, to look at health, education, work. And Rob approached me in probably mid 2015 with this idea of creating then a digital space. This is the mid 2010s where everybody's getting a website. Everybody's leaning into using social media to reach their communities. And Rob approached me and a couple of other guys, was like, look, let's create a space which is black, queer, and black British, because everything that we were gaining from the internet was very much US focused. And whilst there are similarities because of our race and the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, that ultimately our lived experiences can be very different. So we set up Blackout with the express intention of providing a digital space where black gay men could write, be photographers, create art, whatever the medium that they worked in. We wanted to give them a platform within the internet that would able to enable them to express themselves. And through that building of a digital community, we slowly then start thinking, actually, we've got something here. Men love connecting online, but why don't we connect them in person as well? So we built it from there.
Did you feel that Blackout UK was specifically challenging directly any particular areas?
No, and that was the beautiful thing about Blackout UK. We didn't set out from that. We didn't set out from a place of deficit. This wasn't about, oh, we've got to fix this because white gay men aren't doing this. I remember one of the early conversations that we had when we were kind of brainstorming what, our mission statement was and what our aspirations were. We made it very clear we're not having conversations about sexual racism online. We're not going to talk about no blacks, no femmes, no facts on Grinder, because that was not of interest for us. That again comes from a space of negativity. And what we wanted to do was to celebrate black queer lives, black gay men's lives in the UK. So acknowledging that we were impacted by racism and homophobia, we were criminalized because we were black men, we were institutionalized because we were black men, acknowledging all of those things, acknowledging we had higher rates of HIV, but always coming from a place of love, joy, and celebration, because very often that is not how our lives are told.
Can you share with us an example of where and when you realized that your ambitions for Blackout UK were working?
Oh God, yeah, wow. That's a good question. Sometimes I'd fumble with that. Yeah, it was. We did a project. We did lots of things. Like Black Menu Brunch. We did one of the biggest things we did. We did a takeover at the National Portrait Gallery one Friday night. Filled it with 200 black gay men, black gay poets, a black gay DJ rocking in the atrium. It was amazing. I think that's when we knew we'd really arrived. But I think for me personally, it was when we did a project called The Inheritance. So the play The Inheritance had opened up at the Young Vic. I was able to wangle us a bunch of tickets, and we were also trying to get younger black gay men involved in culture. And we know the theatre is incredibly expensive, so we took probably about 10 black gay men to each night. And then what we did as a result of that, the only thing we asked of them was we wanted them to write an article for us on inheritance, what they've inherited from their black gay elders, again recognizing that there's a generation that has always been here, what's been passed down to them, and then what they're going to pass on to the next generation of black gay men. And that for me was just showing this really important link between generations that preceded me, acknowledging there were men that came over on the Windrush that were queer, but also thinking about a future that we are always going to be here. And so for me, doing the big outdoor events was amazing. Yes, who doesn't want to take over a national institution? But providing a space for Black queer men to have this really unique Black British experience, which looks backwards and looks forwards and celebrates our lives, was probably one of the most powerful things that I think we did.
One of the ambitions that you have is HIV equal.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I think this is where things like PrEP and U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable, come into it because, ultimately, I think because of my journey and being diagnosed at such an early age, that HIV has always been part of my life. And I'm not a fan of being othered because of it. And we are all, in some ways, HIV equal, whether we're negative, positive, or untested. We're all kind of dealing with this thing that can invade our worlds at any time. I've always been a champion of trying to ensure that people who are diagnosed with HIV are empowered enough to stand up for themselves, to demand the rights that they so rightly deserve. And that's not just like human rights, but that's the right of love, the right to intimacy, the right to good sex, the right to family. And what I've always wanted to teach my negative brothers, my negative siblings, is that there but for the grace of God go you. That's number one. And secondly, we're all in this. We're all impacted by this. We can't escape it. So let's try to be equal about it.
One of the things I find most frustrating is so often when we have sexual health conversations, we don't take any accountability or responsibility for our own sexual health as individuals. We always place it onto the other person. You should have told me this, or you should have done this, or you should have done that. And I think one of the most important things about U equals U campaign is that hopefully it'll go some way, not only towards educating people about what untransmittable means, but also effectively saying to people, you need to be responsible for your own body and your own knowledge.
I mean, one would hope, right? I mean, but we don't live in a utopia. And, I hate to say that people are stupid because people aren't stupid, but people don't believe science, number one. We saw that through COVID. We saw that through the anti-vax movement. We see it today. People, parents not vaccinating their kids because rubbish they've read on the internet. But people are going to be people, and they're going to be frightened, and they're going to be scared, and they're going to be worried about the unknown. That's one. Secondly, people with HIV are hugely stigmatized insofar as the virus is stigmatized, and it always has been. People are deserving who get this. It was something that you did that got you to get this. You were promiscuous. How can I trust you? I remember when U equals U was first being bandied about, and I was still on Grinder at the time, and somebody, and I'd say, am I detectable? And they would say to me, are you sure? Are you definitely taking your meds? And I would always have to say, and I remember saying to a guy, let me just make something really clear to you. Yeah. I take my medication to keep me alive. The fact that I get to fuck you bareback is a bonus of that.
Absolutely.
I'm not mad at people for holding those views because people hold views. We have a poor education system which doesn't teach well about sexual and reproductive health. There are lots of people who have incredibly outdated knowledge around HIV in 2025. But where are they going to get that information from? Right? We live in bubbles now. The world is fragmented. So the idea of everybody watching EastEnders and seeing an EastEnders storyline like we did in the 90s with Mark Fowler is completely unheard of. Young people, young gay men are coming out on the scene and they don't see HIV in the same way that we did. It's not visible. So you can't make a judgment on that. So I'm not mad at people anymore. We need to be better at educating people, making sure they not only have the right information, but they have access to the right information in ways that is acceptable and accessible to them. It's pointless me getting mad. It's pointless me going to people in the world, don't stigmatize against HIV, people with HIV. That's like me going out in the world saying, don't be a racist. I mean, you're going to be a racist, you're going to be a racist. There's very little I can do about that. But what I can do is I can work with people of color and say, this is how you combat racism. Because dickheads are going to be dickheads. My energy just needs to go somewhere where it can be useful and can benefit people.
But you've been quite critical about inequalities that you have witnessed within the HIV sector itself, despite your decades of activism. Is this still a problem?
In a number of organizations, yeah. I mean, I think it's changed. And I think, some of the big organizations, particularly post 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd, have stepped up their game. Whether or not it's sustainable and it continues forever is a completely different question. But yeah,
that's crazy. That's only 5 years ago.
I know. But if you look across the landscape and you go, okay, for example, right? I've just said to you earlier on, the black women are the second largest group impacted by HIV in this country. Where are the black CEOs? There are a handful of amazing black doctors in this country. We've got people like Professor Kevin Fenton, Dr. Vanessa Appiah, Dr. Nneka Nkola. We have some amazing people, but that's a small number when you think about the population that's been impacted. And those things have a knock-on effect. If we think about, for example, PrEP access, who was driving the push for PrEP? Gay men. So why would gay men stop and pause to think about that black African migrant woman who lives in domestic violence, is a migrant, is worried about her status? Why would he think about her? Because he's just not going to. He never has. So absolutely at the top, we need to see massive change. The other thing that we also need to consider, and I'm a commissioner now, so I sit on the other side of the fence, but I've sat on both sides, is that black and brown organizations are severely underfunded in this country. There are very, very few that exist. And if they do, they're not trusted. And therefore, they can only do small piecemeal bits of work.
So what can we do? People listening to this, how can we help bring about structural change?
That's the million-dollar question. And there is no easy answer. We keep fighting. We keep plugging away at it. We keep demanding change and I'll call it straight up, Dan. We call shit out when we see it. We demand change. If we think about our institutions, our voluntary sector, we have to, when we look around the table, we go, there are no people of colour here. Why is that? Why is that not working? If we're having panel discussions, we need to ensure that those are balanced, but we also need to ensure that people who attend them are paid and remunerated. We need to ensure that people from the most marginalized communities are able to have the tools to engage in policy decisions and policy making and funding decisions. But that also comes with having to train people up, having to give them opportunities to get them in the door. And very often, there's that the master's tools will not protect us, right? Something like that Audre Lorde says. But we're trying to work in a system that wasn't built for us. And until that system is dismantled, or people within that system help to kick down the doors for others and make it easier, we're never going to see change. So it's incumbent upon all of us who sit in positions of power or have a certain amount of privilege, and I count myself in that group of people, to ask those difficult questions. The one thing I'm really proud about with my own personal legacy is, because of my work, I know that black queer men are part of a conversation. I know now that if funding is made around HIV, the needs of black and brown queer men are questioned by commissioners, by directors of public health. So that's the difference. And those are the things that we have to do that can make a change.
And so what do you think that lonely 17-year-old who feels completely isolated in the world, having just tested positive, would think if you could hear you say that about that legacy that you've got?
In some ways, it's a really strange one. In some ways, I think he would be like, Jesus Christ, what the hell? Who is this person? And I think part of him would go, I'm not surprised. I think part of him would generally go, nope, I'm not surprised. That's where we're meant to be. That's what we're meant to be doing.
So what's been the most surprising thing for you in that journey from that 17-year-old to now?
That I made it and I'm still going. And that's not because of my health. I mean, obviously, yes, I survived, the darkest times, but that I made it, and I'm still going. I'm still motivated. I'm still enthused. I'm still excited about what I do, and the work that needs to happen. I mean, I sometimes I'm really exhausted by it, and I just want to go off and write a book or just do nothing.
And indeed, if you do take some time off, you could always, go to the KFC below the Prince of Wales in Brixton.
On a very drunken night, maybe.
But your work extends far beyond just doing direct health interventions, because you do fantastic podcasts like Black and Gay back in the day, and you launched Bow magazine. Why do you think it's important to preserve stories such as yours, such as things like this podcast? Why are we doing this? Why are we taking time out to do it?
My friend and fellow co-founder of Blackout UK, Dr. Antoine Rogers, has a line he used and actually set up a company called Evidence to Exist, which more broadly means evidence of our existence. And I think particularly for Black and brown people, me growing up, there were no stories of my past and my history. And admittedly, there was a very different generation. And I think it's really important that we capture these stories and we record them for the archive, for future generations, so they can learn from us. They can understand the past and the history that's gone before them, that it gives us strength. It's also quite cathartic to do this and to get these stories down as well, because one then on a personal level gets to process their own narrative and understand how they got from A to B. So I'm incredibly privileged privileged and honored whenever I'm asked to do anything like this, Dan, particularly with people that I like yourself, because it gives me a chance to reflect and go, yeah, that 17-year-old, yeah, you did all right. You didn't do too badly. And you still got stuff to do.
Absolutely, you didn't do too shit after all, did you?
Did you shabby, mate?
So then we're coming into the final third of the episode now, Mark, and what do you think some of the unique challenges are that you are facing and that your HIV positive brothers and sisters who are north of 50 are facing?
North of 50, I love that. I mean, we're aging, right?
Sorry, I should say aged old hags like you and me.
I'll take it. I mean, obviously we're aging, right? And I think there's something which is very real that for many of us, particularly those of us who are longer term diagnosed, we didn't expect to be here. So I think there's cases where we haven't planned for this part of our lives. We don't have pensions, we may not have financial stability, we may have lost friends and lovers and that history of a significant part of our life. So there's a financial situation, but there's also the social. Many of us live in isolation, and whilst our HIV health may be okay because we started treatment early enough and we managed all the illnesses that we had, our biological health is kicking in as well. And so we have to worry about that. And I think for some of us, there are concerns around having to come out all over again around your HIV as you go into care around your age and the stigma that you might face, like, oh shit, I've dealt with this already, now I've got to deal with it because I'm going for physio. Or Maureen in the care home is got no idea about HIV, right? So those are the things that I think are concerning for some of us. And wheeling back to some of the things we said around support services, we don't have those anymore. There is no landmark for me to go to. There is no London Lighthouse for me to go to. Our big organizations pretty much provide everything online, and many of us want and need social connection. So those are some of the real fears for many of us and the realities of the world that we are living in.
In this part, I like to sort of, through audio, take us to the Remembrance Garden at London Lighthouse. in West London, which many of my guests have said is an incredibly important space. And I'd like to ask you if there was anybody you would like to remember, any story that you would like to share with people listening.
There isn't an individual, Dan, but I think I would, in the garden, I would have some nice alliums and some calla lilies, and I would plant them for all of the black gay men in the UK and abroad who passed away in the epidemic, who passed away in isolation, in fear, with no family around them, with shame, and alone. Those would be the people that I would want to remember, the nameless black gay men. And some of them are named, but they're forgotten, and we forget them in our history because we are getting older, and they were forgotten quite a while ago. So that's who I would want to remember.
Now, Marc, as your final parting shot to our audience, could you please send your postcard to the world? What is your final message to throw out there?
I mean, it would immediately be burn down Babylon. So burn down the system would be would I literally, the world is burning, so let's just burn it down. I mean, I think, my postcard to the world is, and I've learned this a lot from my work with Will Nutland at the Love Tank. We named our company the Love Tank when we set that up in, I want to say 2017, 2018, I can't remember now. And the whole idea behind that was around refueling the community with love and with goodness. And I think that would be my kind of message to the world is be more Love Tank. Is refuel around you. And that's not about creating big organizations. It's not about, going on protest demos or writing to your MP. It could quite simply be checking out that queer person that you haven't heard from a while, putting a nice social media post out, which is encouraging this. So that would be, for me, is just refuel the world. It needs it. It really needs it right now.
Marc, I can't tell you what a joy it's been having the excuse to make another program with you. Thank you so much for giving up so much of your very hot Brixton Tuesday evening to this podcast.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Dan. You draw so much out of me, but no, I absolutely adore talking to you, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And in addition, a huge thanks to Jim Wojciech, who's been brilliant at bouncing ideas off and also finding many of the inspiring guests from this series. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Please do drop me an email if you'd like a second series in 2026, or if you'd like to guest on it. The email address is hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. This has been a fantastic series to make. A huge thanks again to all the wonderful guests, and I do hope that you've enjoyed listening. I've been Dan Hall.